Hello and welcome. It's a great pleasure being here with the Watch Democracy Grow and also with this fantastic gathering of Diaspora from throughout the United States and even overseas here in Washington, D.C. We're very pleased to be here and to have you, those that are visiting with us. I'm Dr. Sam Hancock, the President and Executive Director of Emerald Planet International Foundation, also the Executive Director and host for the Emerald Planet TV. We cover all 214 countries and territories around the globe, and we make our television productions, which are about the best practices, the green best practices, I want to say, on planet Earth. We have 3,000 different TV shows and 750 programs, again, all about best practices. So as I was telling my colleagues up here, we can do anything from putting in a dry toilet to rebuilding all of Manhattan City and New York and everything in between through our website and the people that we actually have had on the Emerald Planet TV. Sitting right next to me is Mary Ura. She is the coordinator for Watch Democracy Grows. She's the one that has me involved in these events. I think the work she's doing is just absolutely outstanding. And I'm going to let her go and talk about what she's doing and the importance and how she was an integral part of everything that's going on here through this outstanding conference. Mary?
Thank you. I want to thank each and everybody who is here tonight. My name is Mary Uwera. As they've already mentioned, I'm the coordinator for Watch Democracy Grow activities in Washington, D.C. And I'm a member also of OVC, which is an umbrella organization that has brought all of us here together. Tonight, I will just introduce the team that I'm with and then kick over to the presentation. On the extreme end, I have Dr. Bland, who is our senior board member, advisor on democracy and good governance. Next, I have Dr. Freeman, who is also our senior advisor on economic development and infrastructure on the continent. Next, I have the moderator, who has already given an ample introduction, but he is also our senior advisor on the issues of conservation and planet Earth maintains all conservation at Watch Democracy Grow. So I'm so glad to be here tonight, and I will hand over to him to moderate the panel. I thank you.
Mary, before I give the microphone down to Lawrence and Lawrence, tell us a little bit about the new Marshall Plan for the African continent, and just take a few minutes and summarize some of the activities, because this is something that's been going on for quite a while. As we're looking at the rebuilding of the Ukraine, and we're talking about the Marshall Plan for that, then Africa needs to be a part of this whole movement on the planet. And you'll be pleased to know that I have a section of my website is dedicated, it's called Africa Fast Forward. Africa Fast Forward. We predicted this almost 2 decades ago, and I'm glad to see this is happening today because everything is catching up to move forward with development. But Mary, about the new Marshall Plan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hancock. As actually, due to time, those are areas that we thought we would be able to touch on, because we can't talk of agriculture, we can't talk of any economic development when we don't have money. We all know that after the Second World War, Europe was actually built, in particular German, by that Marshall Plan. So it's an area that majority of our speakers are passionate about, but due to time, I would just highlight the areas that actually, I would say, pulled me into OVC, trying to get all of us together, in that if we advocate for that which is going to help Africa I'm hoping that Ukraine war ends soon, and I'm hoping that Sudan crisis does not go beyond. Our next thing on the table should be the Marshall Plan, because we can talk a lot, we can have fantastic presentation, but by the end of the day, when you check what cripples African Union, what cripples the East African regional forces actually who are in Eastern DRC, kindly, economic crisis is also there. So how do we really empower Africa economically? How do we give out equity to Africa for it to materialize? That's what we've been working with the whole team. Dr. Bland on the issue of promoting good governance, Dr. Freeman on economic development and infrastructure. We spoke of agriculture. Currently we're having issues of flooding. We need really technology, high-tech agri machine that we don't have the ability for. And then Dr. Sam is usually our promoter for that idea, which we hope with the time will materialize. And many of them, as you know, when you talk of the Marshall Plan, people raise the issue that, we don't want to call it Marshall Plan. So we called it Africa Infrastructure Development Plan, so that it is an African initiated, rather than saying, no, we don't want to hear it as a Marshall Plan. I thank you, moderator, and I'll give back to you.
Well, one of the things I'd like to share, and then I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Friedman sitting right beside me, is that we've been developing the concept over the last decade of what we call whole of country development program. Whole of country development program. Using the natural resources with each of the different countries. As many of you know, the 54 countries on the African continent fit together absolutely perfectly with all the various natural assets and the geopolitical locations on the continent, and even some that are double landlocked. There's many assets that can be used and developed. We've developed what we call the U.S. Brain Trust that looks at each country, the natural resources that they have, and how those can be developed and monetized for use within the country, taking no foreign debt, at the same time to develop their own gold reserves or whatever reserves that's appropriate for that particular country, but to pull countries that have this problem, the challenge of debt, and at the same time to be concurrently having very robust and active development programs, the need for renewable energy, for water, wastewater, transportation, healthcare, education, all these various activities and infrastructure development can be self-funded. And there's actually a way to do it. There's precedents for it. And these two gentlemen beside me actually have many ideas about this. But Dr. Friedman's right beside me, Lawrence Friedman, and he's going to be talking about in essence, the new social economic development for the African continent. Larry, thank you.
Thank you. Mary had asked me to speak on the question of economic development, democracy, and good governance. What I'm going to say here to you tonight is going to be considered controversial by some, but unlike the previous panel, which was discussing high-tech finance, I consider myself a physical economist. How do we raise the standard of living of the average person, both the United States and, of course, my work in Africa over 30 years? The fact of the matter is that we cannot have democracy without economic development. The problem is democracy is being banalized, reduced to the idea that we'll have elections every 4 years. That is not what democracy is. Democracy is much more profound than that. Democracy is the ability of all the citizens of a nation to have the material standard of living and leisure time to actually discuss and debate profound ideas for the future of their nation. Not simply showing up at the polls every 4 years, but choosing candidates who have a vision for the country because the citizen has a vision for the country. As you may know, Alexander Hamilton, one of the founders of our country, wrote in the Federalist Papers, which are not widely read among Americans, but they're the key documents that backed up our Constitution, that this is an experiment in self-governing and whether people will make the right choice for the future of their country. And that requires the ability of the average citizen, the mother and father of a family or an African nation. Do they have electricity? Do they have a house? Do their children have separate rooms with electricity so they can read? Do they have the leisure time to sit and discuss ideas for the future of the country? Great statesmen, which are very few now, if any, think 20 to 40 years ahead. In their mind's eye, they have a creative idea about where the country should go. And they implement policies today to get to that point in the future. The citizen should have the same responsibility. The key to the United States, as Hamilton and Franklin and other people said, is an educated citizenry. Now, you're not going to have people in Africa or anywhere in the world who are living in abject poverty, who are trying to find food the next day, who are trying to eke out an existence. They're not going to have the time for discussion of ideas, profound ideas. They're trying to think about survival. That has to end. Poverty is the biggest problem killing democracy. A poor population is never going to be governed well and is not going to have democracy. That has to change. I have put forth for many years that the idea that electricity is a human right. Economic development is a human right. Now, the United Nations officially disagrees with that. They claim economic development is not a human right. NGOs, human rights groups, pro-democracy groups, they disagree with me entirely, but they're wrong. Because if you don't have the basic qualities of life, material qualities of life, you're never going to have a well-governed country. Desperate people are easily manipulated. Poor people are easily pushed in one or different direction. So to change this, we actually have to promote an economic development policy for Africa that raises the standard of living of all the people, increases the wealth per capita for every family, for every citizen of the country. One requirement is infrastructure. We need real physical infrastructure. Africa is dying from the lack of electricity, from the lack of railroads, from the lack of quality education, from the lack of healthcare industry. So don't say to me that that's not a fundamental human right. If you're going to have a child, is that child going to be developed? Every human being born has the potential of creative mentation, creativity in mind, which is not replicable among any other artificial machine or species. If you want to develop the mind of every child born, then you have to have a constantly improving standard of living for that family so that child can be nourished. Now, Mary and my friend over here brought up the Marshall Plan. Actually, if you look at the United States, you get a different idea of what is possible. 250 years ago, after the American Revolution, we were very much in horrible conditions. We had $75 million in debt to the states, to the federal government, the Federation. We were an agricultural, agrarian-based economy. Those 75 million debts is about $2.5 trillion today. Alexander Hamilton reorganized the entire financial banking system of this country and based it on a principle of creating a national bank, the first national bank to promote development where people could actually lend money for manufacturing and infrastructure. And Hamilton, as Washington and others, they knew that manufacturing was the key, that unless they had a manufacturing sector, that the British would always be able to control and manipulate the terms of trade of produced products. So Hamilton wrote a report as the first Secretary of the Treasury on banking, on productivity, on credit. Franklin Roosevelt did the same thing with the Bretton Woods. Even though the Bretton Woods today is not the same as he put forth. His conception under the International Development Bank was to provide liquidity and capital for the developing sector. They must have this to raise the standard of living of their populations. So we have examples where we transform nations, nations that were in debt, nations that went through a depression, nations that went through a war, and yet through the right economic policies, we were able to bring those countries to a higher level. What Africa needs today is long-term, low-interest credit. Mary and I and others have been working, as she said, on an Africa infrastructure development plan where you capitalize a bank, and the purpose of the bank is to lend credit, long-term credit, for railroads, for industry, for manufacturing, for electricity. One of the greatest developments on the continent of Africa today, which I just spoke at last week in Georgetown, is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. It's going to produce 5,150 megawatts of power. It was funded by the Ethiopians, built by the Ethiopians, and they're utilizing hydropower. Now, hydropower is one important aspect of energy, but this can be done throughout the entire continent. And Mary and my proposal is we have a separate bank, capitalize the bank, and that bank's purpose would only be to lend long-term, low-interest credit for countries to build their infrastructure. Without that kind of development, without that kind of economic growth, you're not going to have the kind of democracy that we really should have and can have, because people cannot really think if they're in poverty. So that's a very brief summarization of my point.
I want to say,
Microphone, please.
microphone, please. That's it. Hello.
Microphone, it's not.
Hello.
Yes, just turn it on back there.
Hello.
There you go. Thank you.
I thank you for that. I'm a little perturbed, and I've given many presentations over the years about economic development and the conditions in the black community internationally. We were just given 30 minutes, 7 minutes apiece for each of these brilliant speakers. They have so much to convey to you, and you're not going to get what you're looking for with 7 minutes from each one of them. It's almost insulting. We all traveled a great distance to get here to talk to you and give you the benefit of what you need to know to strengthen your economy. And when you shut us down insultingly in that instance, I have a problem with that. We're not young men. I'm over 80 years of age. I don't look it, but I'm in better shape than many of you young men in this room. I've had over 63 years in the civil rights movement all across this country, raising the issues of economic parity and civil rights. We're dealing with a different issue today, which is economic rights. I'm going to ask this wonderful group, if at all possible, you can set aside some time tomorrow and treat us with the respect we have for you and give us an hour respectfully. Yes. And you will learn a lot of things that you do not know. Yes, sir.
We have had you, Dr. Brad. We have listened to this gentleman. There's a lot of wealth of knowledge. And Mary is extremely passionate about this. We are all very passionate about what she brings. We'll give you more time.
That's fine. Is that tomorrow? Now. Then that's fine. I respect you that much more for correcting such an injustice to us. Economic development is a necessity worldwide. What the system has denied almost everybody, not just in America, but worldwide, is the ability to meet their necessities. Necessity has no respect for man's laws. Man's laws are confining. What we're attempting to do is to bring a program to you that you will benefit from in the long run. The Marshall Plan of Africa is a great idea, but there are other constraints. Economic growth and development is essential here in these United States of America. The joblessness involved, in other words, the high levels of unemployment, and it's always at the expense of the poor, because the poor is so ill-informed. These people on this panel with me, gentlemen and ladies, are so highly skilled and knowledgeable. What we will present as we're discussing it in this instance are things that you need to know. We listened to that last panel, and we have been here all day long. The essential question was not answered by that panel themselves. They're all good people. How do you create capital? One of the biggest mistakes you make is that each of you think you have to own 51% of a project. Biggest mistake you can imagine. He owns 51, he owns 49. What is in there for me and Miss Mary? Absolutely nothing but a promise. Chase Manhattan Bank, one of the biggest trillion-dollar banks in the world, is owned by the Rockefeller family. You know how much money, what percentages they own of that bank? 6% maximum. That means 94% of that bank is owned by other people who are investors. Don't close out your potential. In addition, when you incorporate, select the right place to incorporate, such as Delaware. There are no capital reserve requirements. You can issue 1 million shares of stock and let everybody participate. Penny shares. Simple process. The Fortune 500 got to be as large as they are because they understood how to capitalize on the dollar and what that penny represented. What I have to say would go on for an extended period. I want to hand this back to my colleagues so that everybody gets the option to speak a little bit longer. I thank you for that.
I am going to give you another chance, Larry, if you will, and if we can hand the microphone back. Looking at democracy, how do you see that as a public good? Larry, we'll pass that over to the other. There you go. How do you see democracy as a public good for Africa and for the world?
Let me explain something when I say this about democracy. In the United States of America, the Constitution of the United States was a democratic republic, 1792, if I'm correct, a democratic republic, which was created by Thomas Jefferson, who believed in the concept of democracy. Today we have certain political figures who want to destroy democracy. And the only way they can destroy democracy is to remove the Bill of Rights from the Constitution. They don't want to destroy the Constitution. They want to keep that intact. But they want to remove the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights guarantees your democracy when nothing else does. It's the fundamental basis for freedom and economic growth, economic participation by all. It provides an education and an opportunity to do what every other nation in the world does. Remember, the United States is the most powerful country on this planet Earth. Look at the African American income in the United States. It's at $3.9 trillion. annually. Out of 236 nations in the world, if we were a nation, we would be ranked number 6 behind Italy. Yet African Americans have been left out of the mix in other minorities. To have that kind of economic wealth and not own anything is a tragedy and an embarrassment to the concept of democracy. We have been excluded from the mainstream of this country. That gives everybody the opportunity to meet their necessities if given a fair playing field. What I saw today, which I was so pleased with, at each of the panels, not one of the panel members mentioned anything to do about white folks or black folks. Not one of them. And I've witnessed all of the panels today. What they talked about was being able to lift themselves up from poverty, lift themselves up so that they could be proud of their heritage, lift themselves up so they could join the rest of the world who is benefiting by the power of the almighty dollar. I was really taken back and moved by that, because it spoke to the realization that you are like anybody else. In us, you have a right to exist and to participate in the mainstreams of a democratic nation that has proven that democracy works for everyone if it's not impeded by something else. So when I'm asked a question about democracy, I see the truth in it, the opportunities to vote, the opportunity to get an education, the opportunity to have health, the opportunity to be treated fair as a human being. So I'm enthralled by the concept in each of your nations of following those pathways. Someone who stays in a position for 40 to 45 years as a president of a nation should be removed immediately from office. Taken off that position of power. Bring in young people who have a future for their nations. Don't stagnate an economy because someone wants to remain important at the expense of the benefit of their own people. You have 54 nations. You have an independence that others don't have. You have rich resources that had been colonized because you didn't have a democracy. You're working towards a common end. And it's good to emulate the United States. And the one thing that's so sad when we look at the issues of terrorism in America, these are people who would interlope on our democracy. The United States doesn't have one law against domestic terrorism. Can you believe that? Not one law in the United States is in opposition written against terrorism. We do have laws written against international terrorism. And that's sad. We've allowed the Nazi Party, the skinheads, the KKK, and every subversive hate group to thrive. And we keep Al-Qaeda and all of the other subversive organizations away from the United States and don't allow them to organize legally here. But we're permissive when it comes to those other groups because we have a sickness in the Congress of the United States. They're no longer concerned about truth, no longer concerned about being fair or doing the right thing. They're willing to lie about anything to stay in power at the expense of good government. So when poor people are poor, they're not poor because they want to be poor. They've been relegated to a different level, and it's always at their expense. So when I'm asked a question about democracy, It's the right thing. It's God sent. It has common sense. But when people work so hard to remove the common sense of democracy, they themselves should be removed, and never at your expense. I hope I answered that question. It's a long way around, but I wanted you to understand my words tonight. I look forward to the rest of the conference. God bless you all.
Thank you for sharing that, and that's why we wanted to stay on the stage right now so we can go through this whole topic. Dr. Freeman, taking off on what we just heard, which is very profound, and thank you, Laurie, for sharing that with us. How do we take what you were talking about, the economic parity, economic development, match that with democracy, and make these two horses run in tandem to pull forward the entire economy and all peoples within this economy?
Thank you. The key question is actually credit. People get fixated on money. Money is something you possess in the here and the now. I'm not interested in money. Credit is what extends you into the future. And that is why we have the examples of history, such as the United States, which I briefly mentioned, is when you provide credit, it enables you to build something in the future that returns productivity to your economy. Unless we have continuous productivity, where the people of a country can raise their standard of living year after year after year, sustained and continuous, how do you do that? You do that by, one, you have to have a foundation of infrastructure. And every level of infrastructure changes as you bring in a new science and new technology. You have to have manufacturing. Hamilton's argument against Jefferson and others who are agrarians was that industry complements agriculture. But without manufacturing industry, you're still a subject of colonialism. Look at Africa today. 3% of world trade of finished products comes from Africa, just 3%. No country in Africa, and I've been looking at this for 30 years, has a robust manufacturing sector, has an industrialized economy. Therefore, you are subject to terms of trade dictated by the international cartels. The IMF and the World Bank are not functioning as Roosevelt intended. The World Bank used to be called the International Development and Reconstruction Bank. It's no longer called that because they don't do that. So we have to do it. Now, by promoting this kind of economic development, you actually develop inside the minds of the citizens a concept of what is good for the nation and the nation's future. We all have families. We have children. The nation is supposed to help us provide from one generation to the next. If we don't do that, we're cutting off democracy. The whole idea of the Constitution, and I would add to what Dr. Bland said, the preamble of the United States Constitution is unparalleled in the world. It identifies a principle. The principle is for the benefit of the general welfare of the people living today and their posterity, their future. That general welfare principle should guide every country, and every leader should understand that providing for his citizens for generation after generation is the responsibility of elected officials. We are not a democracy. A democracy we chose, as Dr. Bland said, to become a democratic republic. A republic does not allow an ignorant majority to rule. A republic is supposed to elect the wisest, most just people to office who will act in the interest of the entire nation. How do we include every aspect of the nation together in one common mission, which is the development of our nation for future generations? That is the essence of democracy, and that is the essence of what I would call physical economic development.
Microphone. I would agree with that 100%. When I go into the classrooms and give my lectures, whether it's here and abroad, One of the questions I always ask, what is the type and form of government that we have in the United States? Not one single teacher had it correct. They all say it's a democracy. It's not. It's a democratic republic. There's a profound difference in that, and that's why our forefathers, very wise, very learned in the ancients, brought that concept forward. This is over to Mary. She's going to have the last question. Looking at the Watch Democracy Grow, I know this is something that you've been working on for a number of years. This is part of this event here, which has been absolutely fantastic. So how does Watch Democracy Grow fit into this? And according to Dr. Bland and also Dr. Freeman, how do we bring this forward so that we grow the economies, the local communities, which I'm adding, and democracy in the same thrust? So we're all pulling together for the betterment of every citizen of this great country and overall the great citizens on the continent of Africa in 54 different countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hancock. The way we actually work at it at Watch Democracy Grow, I usually tell people that this is an African-initiated program, which is going to base on the history of Africa vis-a-vis colonization, the culture of Africa, our ethnicity and tribal composition, the allocation of the resources that we have. That drives me to the question that was asked to Dr. Bland in as far as is democracy a public good? Yes, it is. And among the doctrines of democracy, there is the equal opportunity for all. That we hope it will redistribute wealth in the long run on the continent. We have also the notion of inclusive democracy, which means you have to include women, you have to include youth, you have to include all ethnicities. I know sometimes people will say, again, that's why we had to define the kind of democracy that US has vis-a-vis what we usually take. The notion that we tend to, and I saw it with even the current crisis in Uganda with the LGBT, whereby the people who are advocating for the preservation of the African culture, they are like, those are concepts that we don't want. Remember, democracy, yes, it supports majority rule or vote on policies, but it has also a highest marginal propensity to save and protect the minority. Therefore, inclusive democracy will give Africa an opportunity to use the diverse of ideas. If we looked here, Dr. Bland asked a question that he wondered that all the discussions, they never included something to do with the black and white. I was supposed to, because due to time it may not be, but I was supposed to highlight on the issues of diversity. And the diversity was supposed to cover black and white, ethnicity challenges on the continent, and how we can use them to develop. Our diversity should be our strength as opposed to be our weakness. So on that option, Dr. Hancock, we hope that at Watch Democracy Grow, we have a 50-50%, women and male, or girl and child, or men and women, which means we are trying to grow the whole community together. If, for example, we are starting a chapter in Nairobi, we are going to look how many Kikuyu members, how many the Kalenjin, how many the lawyers, because you need that community. If we go to Rwanda, we are going to see how many, all the three ethnicities that are going to be there. If we go to Uganda, the all 53 tribes should at least be having a representation. And that drives me to something I usually want to comment on. I think the reason why democracy fails on the continent is although we are allowing what you would call political space and open space, I think we need to work hard towards developing our political parties in mean that they have policies, really tangible policies on why you are standing as an opposition. For example, if I would give an example on Rwanda, the person who would be running, the first thing should be how are you going to deal with ethnicity, because that has been a divide in that particular country. So if you want to integrate democracy, which I usually actually advocate for, that for the betterment of these countries which have been hit in terms of ethnicity, democracy is the best prescription I can ever refer to them. I hope I have been able to answer that.
Okay, Dr. Friedman, if you could pass the microphone to Dr. Bland. I'll give all of you 30 seconds, 45 seconds.
All right, that's enough.
And last statements of what you really want as your takeaway for this afternoon.
This afternoon, I witnessed what I'd call a miracle of people trying to solve a major problem and save themselves. You didn't blame anybody. There was no blame to lay anywhere except yourselves. And that's where you kept it. And I'll take that from this meeting today eternally with me. It's a turning point in the history of poverty, poor black folks, poor white folks in this instance. It's something that we can grow on. And you are going to make a difference in the future of not just the continent of Africa, but in the world. And you must work closely with your other African American brothers and sisters. You're looking for financial resources? Why not target that $3.9 trillion of African American money?
If we want to look at the public good, what is that? Every human being is born universally the same. Despite color, facial differences, it makes no difference. We're all born with the creative spark of reason, which no animal has. So the public good is the promotion of the human species. So each family, all the families that we have here, what is it you want for your children and your grandchildren? You want them to have a better life. You want them to have improved material circumstances. You want them to nurture and develop their children's creativity. So ethnicity is ethnic nationalism is an attack on human beings, because we're not defined by bloodlines. We're not defined by geography. We're defined by the power of creativity. And the public good of any group is the same as the other group, to work together. In the 1600s, they had the Treaty of Westphalia, and they said the interest of the other is an interest of thyself. Our common interest, our public good, is to promote the development of the human race to higher and higher levels, and we do that through the growth of our families, through the governance and policies of our nation.
Thank you. The last 3 minutes I would emphasize again. I remember when I was a student, I had got a scholarship to go to China to study IT. And my interests were not in that. I didn't mention I'm an American of Rwandese descent. After 1994, my interest was to see what I can be able to contribute to that country to be better. So, IT was important, and encouraging the girl child to go to school was also important, but never was it really what I wanted to contribute. So, I remember I told my aunt, I said, you know what? That is an opportunity, but I think I'm going to let it pass because my interest is in political science. I majored in political science, background in foreign diplomacy. I have also a master's in public health, on which I wanted to check on how does good governance affect developmental policies. And I was like, well, I'm not interested in economics because very many people are going there. But on the issue of health, because a health community equals a wealth community. And when we usually talk of good governance, much as democracy would be a work in progress, but it is so far, I would say, the best type of that would help, especially a continent like Africa with all its challenges. I'm glad Dr. Bland said within this group there was no blame game. I think it's high time we moved from the blame game. We have ability, we can do much. I would dwell on 3 issues that I think with the good governance, we can be able to move Africa from point A to point B. Democracy promotes accountability. When we are encouraging, I was very happy to hear that Kenya sent a member of parliaments here. The purpose is not just to go into those parliaments, it's to be a voice. And you have that voice of knowing that if I'm not in this parliament today, maybe somebody else, maybe somebody's son, maybe somebody's daughter, what can they benefit from there? So leave impact, leave institutions that are going to be vibrating and amplify other young generation to move forward. So democracy, since it promotes accountability and checks and balances, I consider it to be at least a solution that can help the continental challenges. Secondly, when we talk of an elite or educated community, which unfortunately sometimes Africa gets challenged on, remember when you choose wisely, even in the US, by the way, where they follow the popular vote, they have electoral college, whereby the best of the best will sit and they are like, you know what, we are going to select maybe Dr. Freeman to be our candidate. Remember, they are the father of democracy, but they know that because of the popular vote effect, there is a possibility that you can have somebody who may be popular. Remember, some people have got a chance, an opportunity of being popular. People rally behind them, but when they are not going to serve. It's high time the African continent and countries realize that when you vote in somebody, just because he's of your ethnicity, just because he's your friend, just because he's, but when he's not going to deliver, you are not only cheating yourself, you are cheating your future development of the country. Third and last, the notion of diversity. We are gifted with a lot of resources, as they've said, in terms of human capital, in terms of even resources that we have. I remember one time one Congolese told me that America nyamba ya tembo hauikuru imalize. America is so huge that it has opportunity that we can win diaspora, can use to develop our countries, and those on the continent share the little which is there until we all reach where we are going. I'll wind up with the challenge with the Eastern Congo. It's quite absurd to see that African countries, 2 of them, have a community. What is our culture? Our culture is that when you don't have something at home and you have a visitor, you share what you have. Enormous country, like, please.
Microphone, please.
It's not deliberate.
No, I know. Yeah, I know that. So to see that enormous country with the resources as it is, we really say we can't be able to accommodate each other, especially when we know it's an effect of colonial rule. I remember, by the way, when we consider the map of Uganda and Rwanda, who knows Bufumbira? Bufumbira is part of Rwanda, but it was put on the side of Uganda. If you go to Bufumbira, they all speak in Rwanda. In the parliament, they are all speaking in Rwanda, but they are Ugandans, and Uganda is appreciating that contribution. Go to Kenya. We have a portion of a group, I think there were 2 brothers. One was on the side of Uganda as a prime minister minister, if I remember. Exactly. The other one was in Kenya as a minister, and they were brothers, but their land was separated. One went on the side of Uganda, another went on the side of Kenya. They were all serving Africa. Let us try to have that kind of. That drives me to the Eastern DRC challenge. Those are, by the way, Congolese of Rwandese origin, who were put on the side of Congo, 1900s, either during the Berlin Conference or, remember, Rwanda was a monarchy. Wherever there was a princely rivalry, I will say it loud and clear, and I promote democracy. We are seeing the current crisis between Prince Harry and Prince Williams. It is common, it happens. He's a citizen, he's now in the US. People have got freedom of movement of going there. Right now I'm a US citizen. I came to US in 2004. I don't think these gentlemen would stand to me and they tell me, you don't have a right. I would fight to death because I am a citizen. So this, from 1800, how do you tell people that they should go back? And then you wonder why Rwanda should have interest in DRC. There are three reasons why they should. One, there is a colonial conflict interest. Two, there is a community or communal conflict of interest. Three, there is a leadership strengthening or consolidation conflict of interest. Can't we solve that problem and we have Africa settled? I thank you for the opportunity.
We're closing out. Thank you for staying with us. This has been very interesting for the four of us, as well as hopefully for you. Three last passing things. Remember, we talk about investments, trillions of dollars. At the same time, think about what you have that's in kind. Gold, chicken, human beings, cotton, coal, whatever it is that you have contributes to the development of Kenya, your own country, and this is something we overlook. When I'm looking to fund my nonprofit, the first thing I look for is in-kind, because this is something that people can easily give, willing to give, and much easier to obtain. So let's always remember the in-kind. Looking at the special responsibilities enterprises, all of your nonprofits actually are morphing into this. If you are not, quote unquote, trying to earn monies, make a profit for your organization, which you have to set up your own for-profit to fund the nonprofit, you will not be around very long because they're all moving. And it's interesting to see how that in the private business sector, many of these organizations are moving to these social responsibility enterprises as the nature of their mission and their vision. And when you see that in their missions and visions, that's the first thing I would say, look at in companies you would like to work with. Make sure that's compatible. This is called being equally yoked. You're working with people that understand you, you understand them, you can trust each other and depend on each other's word. It's very, very important. And the last point is give before you ask. Give before you ask. Many people are running around, setting their business plans, going out to present themselves, but what have you brought to that organization that you're going to be approaching? Or what can you bring to that organization that you're approaching? Think about it from those terms. This is what we can do for you, and if they in turn want to collaborate with you, great. If not, you've now created a public good which is going to help you for the next ask that you have. So always give before you ask. Also, from the Emerald Planet International Foundation, the Emerald Planet TV, we now have 3,000 TV shows. We've interviewed 2,900 different people from 103 countries. We give this all as a public service, and these are now available on your smartphone and can be made available in any school, K-12, colleges, universities, government agencies, and also for the private citizens and your own organization. So if you'd be interested in using these, we give them freely, and they're properly labeled. You have the voices of the experts, you have the images, and also what they're bringing, because if they're not real and they're not actually contributing to society, they never get on Emerald Planet TV. So thank you very much for letting us be with you and share this afternoon, and God bless in everything that you do. Take care.
Wonderful information. That's really nice.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
We should keep
Now, the whole team is okay.
No, it's okay. It went well, but it was worthwhile. Let me see if they can take a picture quick. So, huh? Yeah. Where's the... Where's your picture?
Thank you very much.
For those who are outside, please, you can come in so we can make an announcement for tonight. So we need to make sure everybody's aware of what's happening. If you are outside, come in so we can make an announcement so we know what the expectations are for tonight.
Turn around, man.